My name is Elle, and I'm a transgender woman talking about the Ostrich Effect. This last week, I've taken a bit of a reduction in my social media consumption. I know that you've heard me in weeks past talk about how I've reduced it from where it was. Well, I reduced it even more. I kind of had a rough week, you guys, so I don't know. This episode may be a little bit shorter than is normal. But this is Monday, and I'm recording at the end of the day, trying to get the episode in. I haven't missed a Monday yet. But I'm not going to lie to you. I haven't lied all along, and I have to admit that it was kind of a hard week. My city, I live in the city of Redlands, California, which is in Southern California, Inland Empire. Our city council last week had a conversation about flying the pride flag, the rainbow pride flag, at City Hall during the month of June. It's a practice that's been done for the past 2 or 3 years or so, and apparently the city attorney brought it to the attention of the city council that flying the flag was not technically within the policy of the city, and that they needed to adjust the policy in order to continue doing that. And so they brought up the conversation, and the city council voted to discontinue flying the flag. And obviously, like, flying the flag is unimportant. It ultimately doesn't matter. It's a flag. Like, in the grand scheme of things, it's insignificant. And yet, flying the flag means something in the present context, right? And choosing to discontinue flying the flag means something in the present context. And it made me throw up in my mouth a little, hearing the way that the the Christian nationalists in my town and the Proud Boys, mostly in the region. I don't think there's too many Proud Boys who are actually in my city, but seeing kind of the far right-wing, politically speaking, folks celebrate this decision as a huge victory over queer rights in our city. That was pretty hard to see. And as I was heading to work one morning, the sense of fragility and vulnerability of the current state of things really hit me. And I know that you've heard me bemoan this on the show over and over again. And I probably am putting out the impression that I'm, constantly just on edge about things deteriorating for queer people, which I am. But, for the most part, I live a pretty happy life, and I get to serve people. I get to work with clients and talk with them about what's going on in their life and coming up with solutions and processes for getting to the next steps. I'm really, really busy with parenting, and I love to cook, and I'm in school, and there's a lot going on. So I'm not spending large portions of the day, obsessing about the deterioration of, accommodation and, liberty for queer people in America. But there are moments where it hits me, and it does seem like I've talked about those moments quite a bit. And honestly, this was, this was another one. And it feels like there are moments in which, it feels as though our country could just vote tomorrow that we aren't people, or that we don't exist, especially in terms of trans people. I know that in Montana, trans people were effectively written out of the state constitution, for example. And I know that in Florida, that was last week or 2 weeks ago. And I know that in Florida this last week, there's a bathroom bill that passed that, based on your sex assigned at birth, you have to use the facility. And if you're confronted to get out, you have to get out. And, like I talked about in my bathroom episode, like this is going to affect a lot more cisgender people than trans people, like, which is not really a shocker, but that's the reality of it. And it's going to affect a lot of people really poorly, and people will probably die because of it, because we as a country have like way too many guns and we're crazy about them and we're trigger happy, especially in states like Florida. So there you go. But, it feels very fragile for us as a society, as a community right now. And, this made me think about my privilege, honestly, this week. And I don't think that, and you've heard me say this before, I don't think that being closeted as a trans person buys us the same exact privilege as cisgender people have, and especially cisgender men. But I definitely think that I had a lot of privilege, and a lot of it I'm learning about just now. And it's really painful. It's really hard. And, the truth was that as long as I stayed in the closet, as long as I stayed hidden, as long as I kept my gender secret, I got to keep the privilege of avoiding the consequences of, essentially the consequences that I'm afraid of facing now, right? As long as I stayed in the closet, there wasn't any risk of me disappearing, of my identity being wiped out. And of course, that built up a huge amount of pressure in me, and I had to come out, but I didn't realize how hard it would be. And believe me, like, listen to me, like, I have no regrets, none at all. Like, I'm happier than I've ever been, but god damn, it's really fucking hard at times. And like I said, I wouldn't trade the pain of going back in the closet and living under that pressure and living under that weight. But there's a way in which that weight and that pressure was a privilege, because living in fear is really awful. And so I guess that kind of leads me to, maybe an opportunity, maybe an invitation, because damn, I don't want to live in fear. I don't know about you. I got a message from one of the listeners of the show who sent me a really sweet video clip of her sharing a little bit about her perspective. And it was just so inspiring for me to hear and to see her, because, her perspective was like, look, it's not nearly as dangerous, it's not nearly as hard, it's not nearly as scary as sometimes we might feel, or like it may be made out to be, or, if you only read, Twitter or whatever, that it's not that bad. And I feel like that there's some truth to that. Like, I don't think that it really helps any of us to live in fear. That person's name, I think, was Quinn. So Quinn, just a shout out. Thanks for your message. But, I don't want to live in fear. I don't know about you. But also, I don't know if I can just like will myself to not be stressed out by this horse shit that comes up in my life. And so, this kind of circles back to the Ostrich Effect. One of the things that I have done in my life as a really blunt, quick and easy, blanket coping mechanism has been to bury my head in the sand, to do the ostrich effect thing. Now, this, I guess, maybe like in psychological or scientific terms, we might call this avoidance, where, we're faced with a stressor, we're faced with a problem, and so we run away from it, we avoid it. And that can get us in trouble, especially if we're using, addictive chemicals, for example, to avoid it, or if we're using, dissociation that, lasts a long time, or, if the avoidance is persistent in some way. Like, it kind of can be a bit of a dangerous tool to use, because it does have some downsides. But at the same time, I also think that there is, I guess, a positive way of spinning it, and I guess that's how I feel. Like, I think that there probably are going to be times in my life where I have more energy, I have more oomph, I have more personal confidence, I have more life experience, I have less going on in my life at the time, or, whatever it happens to be, where I will be able to, receive and handle these different kinds of messages that honestly I anticipate will continue to come. And God, like, speaking and having many clients who are queer elders, I know that just by hearing their stories, I know that they've been through like really, really horrendous stuff, much more horrendous than their city choosing to not fly a motherfucking flag, right? So, like, we're probably going to keep going through stress, like, as a minority part of the population, if we're, gender expansive, or we have, a marginalized gender, marginalized sexual orientation, we're likely to keep going through stress and difficulty and, this kind of stuff. And so, I think that burying our head in the sand, going after the ostrich effect, I think it can be like a pretty useful but blunt tool at times. And I think that one of the ways that I think about it, even with its risks, one of the ways that I think about it is that, I'm teaching a course right now on dialectical behavioral therapy, and it has a really unique approach to problems that we face in our life. So if you kind of imagine, well, I have a problem that's shown up in my life. It's a stressor. It's an issue that's showing up here. For every problem, there are often or usually 4 different possible solutions to that problem. And I don't know if I've talked about this on the podcast or not. I feel like I've told every client that I have about this. So you'll just have to bear with me if I've already hashed it in the podcast before. But essentially, if you have a problem, such as your city decided to not fly the pride flag, or, far-right extremists are taking over the government, or whatever it happens to be, you have 4 possible solutions to that problem. The first solution is to solve the problem, right? So vote the people out of office, go and change public opinion through activism, somehow, catch the extremists doing something illegal and, have them arrested and sent to prison. Like, I don't know, like, whatever. Solve the problem. Somehow get them to go away, to go do somewhere else, or convert them to not be bigots anymore. But solve the problem. So that's one way of dealing with a problem. Now, a lot of times problems are really big and they're really complex and they're societal and cultural, and like there's no possible way that we're going to solve that whole problem. And, when it comes to transphobia, it kind of is in that camp. We may all kind of poke holes in it from our different, points of view, our different positions in society, with our different levels of leadership and so on. But transphobia is huge, and I'm not really sure how much any of us are going to be able to completely solve it. It may just take time and education, and there may be a generational effect. At least that's what a lot of us are hoping for. So solve the problem. Another solution, another thing we can do when we have a problem, other than solve it, is to think differently about the problem. So change how we're considering the problem, change how we're making sense of the problem, change how we're interpreting the problem, change the way that we're explaining the problem to ourselves. And, by having a shift in perspective, the problem may not be a problem anymore. It makes me think of a professor I had back in my undergrad years who really emphasized the importance of, unity of the church. Like in my denomination of the time, there were people on the left and there were people on the right, and a lot of times they were fighting with each other and, verbally, throwing little bombs at each other and trying to get their metaphorical truth bombs, throwing those at each other, and, trying to get their chosen officials and leaders into church offices and trying to make sure that the votes went their way and all that kind of thing. And this professor, kind of made the argument that we actually need everyone. We need all these different sides, and I really valued that perspective at the time. For me right now with the political extremism, things have gotten so extreme, especially on the right, that I'm not sure. There's a degree to which it feels like we're in a bit of a death cult, and that there are portions of our society that would rather burn it down than not be in control. Now that may be my pessimism, but in any case, you get what I'm saying. If you can, in the case of the church, if you can wrap your mind around this concept that we need everyone, and that there's a way in which those perspectives on either end of the spectrum are valuable and useful, then all of a sudden it's less of a problem, right? And it's more of an expectation and, a feature, not a bug, as it were. So that's thinking differently about the problem. So we have solve the problem, think differently about the problem, feel differently about the problem. So this would be learning how to cope with the problem more, or learning how to tolerate the stress of the problem in a better way. So sort of saying, look, I have this problem, and what I'm going to focus on is my own emotional regulation and regulating my distress that's going on, right? And so this is we do all kinds of different techniques to kind of bring down our stress. We're not dealing with the problem. If I'm, doing a meditation exercise or a breathing exercise, or I'm, going to physically exercise my body, which is one of the great stress relievers that we know of, or, eating well, or going to a support group, or whatever. There's lots of different stuff that we can do with our to affect our ability to tolerate stress. The stress stays. The crazy people out on the street picketing, the Proud Boys that show up at city hall meetings to spout transphobic and homophobic horse shit. They are still going to be there. But through distress tolerance techniques, we can actually lower our reaction. And as it happens, my choice to put my head in the sand is kind of a blunt tool for managing distress. It's I'm not going to pay attention. I'm going to put myself in a different environment so that I'm not constantly hearing this information, and so that I can allow myself to come down. So that's the third one. And the fourth one, so we have so far, right? Just to review, we have solve the problem, think and feel differently about the problem, and improve our ability to tolerate the problem. The final one is do nothing or even make the problem worse. And that's the fourth option, right? And we kind of, maybe chuckle and laugh and whatever, haha. But there are times when we just don't have the energy. We just don't have it in us, or that our priority is really to find peace and harmony in ourselves. And so we just cannot attend to the problem, or we're completely overwhelmed and we can't deal with the problem. And there's a way in which the ostrich effect, burying your head in the sand, is also kind of like this as well. It's like, I'm totally overwhelmed. I can't do anything about this. The only thing that I can do right now in this moment is to quit listening. And it's really helpful. It's really helpful to have that silence for a minute. And, the way that 21st century news works is that, they want to sensationalize everything so that they keep you on their website, keep you watching their news channel, keep you engaged in their material. So, they're trying to hype things up. And so there's an addictive quality to it, of course, as well. But for me, I right now am using the avoidance of mass media as a coping mechanism. And, for me, that means kind of getting small, doing some of those things that I talked about at the beginning, staying local, being present right here in this moment with you, being with you in the room if I'm your therapist and you're my client. Staying present now, having gratitude for the little things, focusing on the fact that today is my birthday. Hooray! And that I got to spend time with my family, and that we went out to eat and we had ice cream and we sat with each other and laughed. Spending time cooking food is wonderful. Taking a nap, going to bed early. There's lots of stuff that, on the positive sort of end, the byproduct of the ostrich effect is that I get to be here now. And even if that ultimately isn't a sustainable reality to be in, I don't know if it's possible for me to stay off of social media altogether. Is a podcast social media? I think it kind of maybe is. I can step away to take care of myself. And I think that we need to do that sometimes. And maybe even, especially as a trans person, I know that that's true for me. So that's our episode for this week. There you go, the ostrich effect. I'd love to hear from you. When do you bury your head in the sand? And have you? Or maybe have you had good experiences burying your head in the sand? Have you had bad experiences burying your head in the sand? I would love to hear from you. Send me a message. If you want to tweet, you could tweet and just use the hashtag twat podcast. I would love to hear from you. I follow that tag. But how do you navigate that? Do you ever use this method for, kind of taking care of yourself when moments are really stressful? I hope that you have a toolbox for yourself for doing those sorts of things. Thank you, as always, for listening to the program, for joining me each and every week. We are well up over 10,000 total listens of the show. There's about 300 of us at this point who listen to the show every single week, which is absolutely mind-blowing and humbling and beautiful. And I so appreciate your letters that you send me, your notes, your suggestions, appreciations, questions, all the things. It's really heartwarming. I read every single one. And I know as well that there have been a number of show reviews that have come in. And that's been amazing as well. One of the more recent ones, I want to read you one of the more recent ones sent in by RK in San Fran. I really is entitled "Amazing Podcast, Open, Honest, and Thoughtful." This person writes, "I really love hearing weekly updates of Elle's journey through all of her highlights and lowlights. She's incredibly honest, open, thoughtful, and well-spoken. Please keep this up, this very high-quality series. For me, it's truly motivational, inspiring. Thank you, Elle." That is like beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. RJK, you are a wonderful, kind person. Thank you for taking the time to leave that review. If you have a spare moment, I know you have to log in. It's a pain in the rear. Most of our listeners are listening on Apple Podcasts, but there are many also on Spotify. So thanks for liking, rating, reviewing, sharing the show on your social media. And thanks, as always, for your input and encouragement. My name is indeed Elle, and I am a transgender woman talking.